Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are finally here for my LPL Winter Split Round 1 Playoffs Overview and Analysis video. I guess this is Round 1 and Round 2. That's what it's probably saying up in the title right now. This is going to be the first 2 rounds of the LPL, all done in one video, just because we figured it was going to be easiest to get this out of the way in one part rather than spam a bunch of different videos for 2 series at a time, basically day in and day out. This first section of the tournament is obviously very important, but a lot of this kind of feels like setting up the top 4, so that's exactly what we are going to do today, is we are going to be watching these series and setting up for the top 4. I'm excited to get into it. I hope you guys are as well. By the end of today's video, of course, we're going to know our winners finals matchup, and we are going to know our 2 teams that are still alive on the lower side of the bracket, so a lot to play for. By the end, it's going to be pretty determined who is going to be in contention to represent the LPL at first stand. But without further ado, let's get right into it. If you are new to the channel, what we are going to do in today's video is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and of course at the end of the video I will be going over my previews and predictions for the upcoming matchups that we are going to go even more in depth on this channel as we go further on throughout the playoffs. So I'm excited, hope you guys are as well. Let me know down in the comments, what did you think of these 6 series that started off the LPL playoffs? Were there any upsets for you? Did you get them all right? Like, were you shocked by any of the player performances, you know, in a good or a bad way? Always curious to know you guys' thoughts and opinions and whether or not they differ from mine down in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's jump into our first series. These are all going to be best of 5s. Of course, it's win or go home for quite a few of these teams. Only 4 teams are going to be getting that extra life. They're the 4 teams that won their individual groups in the regular season. So winner of Group A, B, C, and D, they start on the upper side of the bracket. Second place in all of those groups start on the lower side of the bracket. We're going to start with winners round 2, or I guess winners round 1, whatever you want to call this. These series are to qualify for winners finals. The winners will immediately be moving on to that winners finals matchup, guaranteeing themselves top 3 at the very least here in the winter split. The losers will of course still go down into the lower bracket. All 4 of the first 4 teams we talk about, the first 2 series, have that extra life from their regular season performances, and we started off with one of the more intriguing matchups on paper, just in terms of the narratives between these 2 teams and how they have differed. It is the number 1 seed from Group C, Thunder Talk Gaming, taking on the number 1 seed from Group B in JD Gaming. And JD Gaming is going to come out on top in a 3-1 series win. Obviously, both of these teams going undefeated in their best of 5s in the regular season, but there was a pretty big favorite for me coming into this, and honestly, that was not shared by a majority of the community. I was genuinely stunned to see how everybody had kind of hyped up Thunder Talk going into the playoffs. As you can see in my power rankings that I have next to each of the team names, you can see Thunder Talk at 8, JD Gaming at 2. I was really surprised to see that people thought Thunder Talk had like a chance to win this series, let alone were favorites to go into this series. I thought JD Gaming, it would have been a pretty major upset if they had lost here. I get that you can look at the best of 1 from Demacia Cup and say, oh, JDG's already lost to Thunder Talk. Thunder Talk beat Bilibili Gaming, but there's just such a small sample size in terms of information about these teams, and I'm definitely relying a bit more on the preconceived notion that JDG has really good players that have been playing really well over the start of this split. I imagine that's going to be able to come out on top against a ragtag group of players on Thunder Talk that have been overperforming. And while there were moments where it was close, you know, Thunder Talk I think had a couple of plays that were pretty solid. Like, this team is solid. They're a top 8-ish team in the LPL. I think JD Gaming has kind of shown that they are clearly kind of a cut above at the current moment, and still are a team that you have to watch out for being like favorites to win the entirety of the LPL. So let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Pays, although I think that it's kind of up for debate. I think Allah continues to be excellent on the top side here. I think you could maybe argue this was his best series. Scout was incredibly good on the Rise. He was also really good on the Azir in game number 1, but Pays was definitely the standout, I think, not only in game 4 in the final game of the series, but throughout basically all of it. This guy is just so insanely cracked. He is as good as advertised. I think there was some concern from JD Gaming fans that he wasn't going to be what Ruler was when he came over and joined JDG. JDG, where it's like, obviously Ruler has this gigantic track record. He's been on teams with multiple players and in multiple situations. You knew that Ruler was a world-class AD carry when he came over. You weren't really super concerned that he was going to struggle outside of that LCK environment, and he didn't. Ruler was excellent, especially in that first year in 2023, but there was more concern with Pyjamas because he was really only a part of those really talented Gen G teams where he got a ton of resources, and when he wasn't receiving a lot of the resources, he didn't look particularly world-class all the time on those Gen G teams. I just think he was like a top 10 player in the world when he did get those resources. So I understand why there was some reservation from JD Gaming fans with him coming over, but he has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt at this point that he's one of the best AD carries in the world. There's genuinely nothing else left to talk about. This guy's mechanics are transcendent, like some of the best, like top 3 of all players in the world. When he gets going, he's able to completely decimate everybody that he goes into. He mega outclassed both 1xN and Feather, who played fine on the other side of this. They didn't make any gigantic errors. They just weren't nearly on the same level as Pyjamas, who is just a better player from them, and that's with Missing kind of running it down. Specifically in games 2, you know, obviously they lost game 2, but game 3 as well on the Ornn, he didn't play particularly well. I don't even think the Leona game in game number 1 was all that great. It really was just game number 4, where Pyjamas was able to completely take over because Missing finally started to show up with some of these games. So credit to Pyjamas, he looks incredible. I honestly was shocked to see that nobody was giving him like a first team All-Pro nod in the regular season. This team was 3-0, and almost all of that was through Pyjamas and Scout. Just being able to dominate like 2v8 in a lot of situations with Shun running it down with Missing, not necessarily playing great, with Ale struggling to kind of break out and, you know, play like a top 3 top laner like he can be. Pyjamas has been that guy, and it's exciting to see that carry over to their first playoff series. Of course, Scout, like I said, was excellent specifically on the Rise. We're seeing Rise really be one of those like bad team beaters. Not that Thunder Talk is a bad team, but if you are better than the team that you are playing against, if you really trust that your mechanics and your general macro sense are just stronger than the team that you're going into, Rise seems to be one of those champs that just makes them look completely like inept, and that's exactly what Scout did in game number 3. Really good showing from him. Ale was excellent throughout this whole series. Loved his game on the Renekton in game number 1, but he was really nice on the Maokai in game number 4 as well. Just, you know, kind of showing that range of options from the top side here for JDG. He was a big reason I felt confident about this team. Shun wasn't running it in the same way that he was at times in the regular season, that he sometimes gets a reputation for doing. And even if Missing was kind of running it, specifically on the Bard in game 2, because that was a horrendous game. And even on the Ornn in game 3, it was not a particularly good look for him. Like, the rest of the team was certainly good enough to be able to elevate. So JDG winning this, now move on to winners finals. They, of course, take on the winner of the series we're going to talk about next, but for Thunder Talk, this is the expected outcome. Like, I know this is considered an upset by certain LPL analysts. If you watch the LPL English broadcast, which, by the way, please go watch the LPL English broadcast. It's excellent. But if you watch the LPL English broadcast, all of the casters were picking Thunder Talk in this series, and I think we've lost our minds a little bit when it comes to this team. I think we have overvalued a small sample size worth of games where they've looked pretty good, and, you know, them beating a Bilibili gaming team that was, you know, really hyped up and is really good, you know, all of the stuff. I think you look at that series and you go, oh, Thunder Talk's legit, but there were a lot of things that went into that series, as I talked about on this channel, and I'm just not sure how translatable that is to teams that are actually trying. I think that was more Bilibili beating themselves than Thunder Talk beating them, and I think that is kind of reflective here. The team didn't even play all that bad. You have a couple of really nice performances in this series, in my opinion. Hoya, I thought, was really, really good on the top side here in basically every game, like throughout the whole series, but specifically in that game 2 on the Rumble, he looked great. Feather completely outplayed Missing for a majority of this series. It just didn't really end up mattering because Pyjamas was popping off without him, and Scout was doing well, and Ale was doing well. But dud of the series for me is going to go to Satab in the mid lane. You know, we were concerned about Satab at the start of the year. He's blown away my expectations at the start of 2025, but he still is a player that has some room to grow, if you will, that has some things he needs to work on, and he just wasn't relevant enough in this series. Going up against someone like Scout in a playoff best of 5, like, obviously it's a pretty gigantic challenge for somebody who's coming off of a season on DRX where everything kind of went wrong. He had a lot of responsibility taken away from him as the year continued to go along. Like, this is a big moment for him, but he just was doing absolutely nothing on the map, contributing really nothing positive to Thunder Talk, and just kind of allowing Scout to do whatever he wanted, specifically in that game 3 on the Hui. I think that was his worst game of the series. series, but he was just so inactive. He really was not participating. When you are the mid laner and you are last on your team in KP percentage, like that's a really bad place to be. And considering the fact that he wasn't exactly like surviving either, there's just not really a lot to like about this performance from Satab. I think 1xN definitely got outplayed, was way too aggressive and got caught out in certain moments, but for the most part, you can still see some of the positives. I'm continuing to pump the brakes on this idea that 1xN is a top tier 80 carry in the LPL. I just don't think he's there yet. I don't know if he's going to get there. Like, this is a very good player that, you know, is around top 7 or 8 in terms of 80 carries right now in the LPL. Pays is not in that conversation. He is above 1xN, and he proved that here. Beishuan was fine, certainly wasn't the problem, but like I said, if your carry duos are just going to get outplayed, like that's JDG's specialty. They were able to play their style, and that's what got them over the top. They are the better team, and I think that became clear. Thunder Talk now goes down into the lower bracket. There's a chance that they run into a familiar foe in lower bracket round 2. Obviously, that would not be ideal for them, but, you know, this is still a good team. They can win a best of 5 in the playoffs and get to top 4. They just need to be able to get an opponent that's not quite as strong mechanically as JDG, which is unfortunately kind of their kryptonite. JDG is just ridiculously good. Pace and Scout are 2 of the best players in the world, and regardless of the consistency of the rest of this team, whether it's Ale, Shun, or Missing, one of them is probably going to play poor every single series, but as long as you have one of the scariest carry duos in the world at the current moment, they can win any series. But then moving on to our second of these upper bracket round 2 matchups, these matchups to qualify for winners finals. It's the number 1 seed from Group D in Ninjas in Pyjamas, taking on the number 1 seed from Group A in Anyone's Legend, and AL is going to pick up the 5-game win. It goes the distance. It, you know, definitely was a back and forth series. Both of these teams definitely putting in the work, but it's Anyone's Legend who comes out on top, who is going to be the team that's moving on to winners finals, of course, to take on JD Gaming. That will not be happening in today's video. That happens later on in the week, but congratulations to AL. This team has proven many times over that they deserve to be considered one of the best in the world. Unlike a team in Thunder Talk that I already talked about, or even like Ninjas in Pyjamas on the other side of this, I'm not taking their, you know, undefeated 3-0 regular season like lightly. I'm not sitting there and going, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to carry that over, right? I still have NIP lower than Invictus Gaming in my power rankings. I still have Thunder Talk way lower than Bilibili Gaming in my power rankings. I put AL into the top 3 because I actually do think that their success so far this year is translatable. A lot of the things that I have seen so far from them, I think, are things you can rely on that they can consistently do. If they end up winning winners finals and going to grand finals, I'm not going to be shocked at all. This team has so many good things going for them, and I think it's really encapsulated by the middle of the map. Ninjas in Pyjamas has obviously been really successful playing through the middle of the map so far this year. Doanby was the MVP in the regular season, and honestly, I think it was deserved. I think that there were other options. The main one that comes to my mind was Pays, who we already talked about in the JD Gaming series, but if you wanted to go for like somebody who really stood out narrative-wise, I think Doanby is the main player from the regular season. I think it makes a lot of sense, but quite frankly, Shanks just completely outplayed him. The middle of the map was a problem for NIP in this series, and AL had all the answers, and it's once again because of Tarzan, who's going to get player of the series. You know, at some point, we just have to like hop on the narrative bandwagon and say all of that hate that everyone was throwing at Tarzan, it was never justified. Like, I know I'm biased. Like, I'm recognizing my bias, and I'm acknowledging my bias because Tarzan is my favorite player in the world, because I got so much shit for defending him for so many years when he was on LNG, you know, as a player that, you know, the fans were actively like targeting, like throwing slurs at after games, like waiting outside the venue in order to yell at him after he would have a bad performance. I was always a Tarzan defender, and I know I feel pretty vindicated because of all of this, but even putting that aside, like Tarzan is just one of the best junglers in the world. There's no way to look at it any other way. At this point, this guy just succeeds basically everywhere he goes, just in general. He made Weibo Gaming a World Finals contender. They made the semifinals of Worlds last year, and he was by far and away the best player on that team. He was actively carrying them for a majority of the year, and they made the semifinals at Worlds, top 4 in the world. That's where Tarzan is at. He comes over here to AL, and he just completely upgrades this roster. Obviously, there are other changes, but Shanks, Hope, and Kale are still the core of this team. Flandre is a good addition on the top side, and he has really been phenomenal so far to start this year. way better than he ever was last year, but Tarzan is the best player on AL now, and he was the best player on Weibo last year. He's one of the best junglers in the world, and he can do everything. You can look at the Skarner game in game number 2 and see him be able to take over there. You can look at, the early pressure that he was able to apply in game 4, and then the domination that he shows on champions like Sejuani in game number 5. He is the best tank player in the world. I think Peanut is genuinely the only other player who can even give him a run for his money in that regard, but they play them so differently, right? Like Peanut picks Maokai and, a lot of these more facilitative junglers and actively plays them as facilitators, is very good at getting his laners ahead, and is very good at setting everything up. But Tarzan picks Sejuani and plays it like it's Xin Zhao. Like, he just plays so aggro in the early game. He gets such a gigantic lead because that champion can't really be punished in the same kind of way, and no other player really does it like Tarzan. It's very fun to watch. This guy is one of the scariest players to run into in the world. This was a jungle masterclass that Aki had no way of catching up to. Like, it is clear that Aki is just a tier below the actual good junglers in the league right now, and Tarzan really was able to punish that. But look at Shanks. It's not like Shanks was really underperforming here. He went up against the MVP of the regular season and quite frankly just bodied him in this matchup. It wasn't even really all that close. Just a fantastic performance from a player who, yes, I've criticized his consistency in the past, but with these shorter splits that might actually play into his favor. Really, the only concern I have with Shanks is that he would lose steam as splits would go along. When you would look at the first 3 or so weeks into a regular season, he would be on MVP pace, and then you'd look at the last 2 or 3 weeks of a regular season and he would be unplayable. If these splits are going to be much shorter, then that window for him to be good is much larger, which I think is obviously a pretty huge positive. Hope and Kale were, really solid here. Kale was maybe a bit over-aggressive and over-eager at times, but still a really good series overall. And Flandre's just awesome on the top side. The dude has been like a huge upgrade for AL, and Ale was a really good player, but I think Flandre's been even better than what Ale was for this team last year so far. I do not want to undersell just how good Flandre has been individually. He's maybe been the best top laner in the LPL. I think that that's a very real argument to make so far in 2025. So just a lot of good stuff for AL. And for NIP, I don't want to freak out too much. You won 2 games off of AL, a very good team, one of them being pretty dominant in game number 1. And I think you did it through the ways that you had been winning in the regular season. Doenby, Leave, like they're playing fine. Leave in particular had another really good series, and it does feel like he can just take that Photic role from these old Ninjas in Pajamas, these old Victory 5 teams with PP God and with, a player like Doenby, in that case, Rookie in the mid lane. Have these big, strong, high profile, high brand name players elsewhere on the map that can take a lot of the attention away from you and just kind of be given the resources to do your thing. Like, I think Leave can fill that role on this team fine. His mechanics are excellent. He just makes bad decisions. But when he's allowed to carry a lot of these games, like game 4, or not game 4, like game 3 on the Smolder, that's a perfect role for him. That's exactly where he should be. Doenby still had a couple of good games. The Rise in game number 1 was excellent. His Rise has been dominant throughout this year. I think AL is happy that it was Fearless because that Rise got out of the way in game number 1. It was just everybody else that kind of struggled. Shanji was not nearly as good as Flandre. Even if he wasn't bad, like, he had a lot of good moments. He led the team in kills over the course of this series, but Flandre was just better and certainly more useful throughout this entire series. And then Aki and PP God are the 2 players that I think got outplayed the most. I'm personally going to give dud of the series to PP God, if only for the kill stealing on the Alistar in Game 5. I think him and Aki both had a lot of detrimental plays over the course of the entire series, but PP God actively kind of sealed the coffin by taking all of the kills and all of the shutdowns on Alistar in Game number 5. I genuinely don't know what was happening there. It was entirely his fault. Like, you go back and watch those replays, it was entirely avoidable situations where he was just getting every bit of gold for Ninjas in Pajamas, and they had no way to ever be able to get back into the game because of that. But Aki also got mega out-jungled by Tarzan. If you wanted to give it to Aki because he was just worse than his opposition on the other side, like, that's also entirely fair. I think it should go to one of PP God or Aki. I think Doenby and Leave were definitely the carries. Leave was probably the best player in this series, and Shanji was fine. He just wasn't as good as his opponent on the other side. Like, I'm not worried too much about NIP. They go down into the lower bracket. I mean, it's not going to get easier, right? Like, there are so many good teams in the LPL. Whoever comes out of that top Esports Invictus gaming matchup is going to be really strong, but we know this team can beat IG in a best of 5. They've already done it this year, and top Esports is a beatable team regardless of whether or not I think they're better or worse than Ninjas in Pajamas. They just need to be able to play their style, which they've shown they can do really well. And for AL on the other side, they're going to be super happy to be done with games for this stretch of the week, to go into winners finals, be 1 series away from making the grand finals, and be 2 best of 5s away from being the champions of the LPL. This is an org that has thrown so many things at the wall over and over again to try and get some sort of a relevant team, and it feels like they finally found one. But now we get to move on to our third series of the video, and this is where things really start to get interesting. Obviously, the winners matchups were important because it qualified you for winners finals, and it got people closer to winning the title, which is the end goal. But of course, every series from this point onwards is lower bracket, which means that now you're in danger of being eliminated. You cannot lose a series. Any team that loses in this video from here on out is done. They are out of the playoffs. They do not get that extra life anymore. That includes the teams that lost in the upper bracket. So we'll talk about obviously all of those matchups, but this starts with round number 1, the actual round number 1 proper. It's all of the teams that got number 2 in their individual groups. So let's go ahead and get into it. Our first matchup, our first elimination series of the playoffs, is a matchup between the number 2 seed from Group C, that being Bilibili Gaming, and the number 2 seed from Group B, that being Weibo Gaming. And Bilibili Gaming is going to come out on top. They're going to pick up the 3-1 series win despite what their jungler attempted to do throughout these 4 games, and they will be moving on to round number 2 to take on Thundertalk Gaming, a rematch of their loss, their 1 loss in the regular season, their 1 series loss, and even their only 3 game losses in the regular season. So Bilibili definitely trying to get some of that momentum back, but 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I think that's probably the proper way to address what ended up happening in this series for Bilibili Gaming. They looked really good. 4 of the 5 members of this team were integral towards the success of the team in general in this series, being able to get them over Weibo Gaming and, getting them back on the right track. But Wei is just trying his absolute best to hold this team down, and he really underperformed in a couple of really, really important games, which we will talk about. For Weibo Gaming on the other side, I feel bad that they got matched up against Bilibili in round number 1. I think that there were multiple teams that won their group that Weibo would have beaten. They just unfortunately happened to be in a group with JD Gaming, who is a team that's better than them, and then they had to face Bilibili Gaming in round number 1. They got the hardest draw of any team in the entire league, and that means they fall here despite Tian playing really well, despite Light and Hong actually having quite a bit of pressure on the bottom side of the map. None of it mattered because Bilibili is Bilibili Gaming. So it's an unfortunate turn of events for Weibo Gaming. I do think they are better than being, just a top 8 team, like a 7th or an 8th place finish in the playoffs, but alas, that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes when it comes to these matchups. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is gonna go to Bin on the top side. His Camille was just way too important to game number 4 for me to go in any other direction. Wei was awful on the Pantheon, was trying his best to lose that game, and Tian was doing a great job on the Zac to really establish pressure. Light was in a decent position on the Jhin, and it did feel like that game could go in favor of Weibo Gaming, but it's been on Camille in the back half of these games. I will continue to say what I have said for many years up until this point, which is that Bin, as good as he is in lane, right, as dominant as he is 1v1, like the thing that makes Bin special and the thing that makes him arguably the best top laner of all time is that there has never been a top laner that's as good at team fighting as Bin. Like there has just never been a player in that role that has been able to do what Bin is able to do. That was a weird sentence with Bin and Bin, like you get it. There has never been a player that's been able to do what Bin does so regularly in these team fights, being able to get on backline members and just absolutely destroy them or find flank angles that others just can't find. He's just so creative in the way that he plays these 5v5s, and that really opens up the door for everybody else on his team to just have an easier time in a lot of these matchups, and that's what he was on the Camille. He's a side lane menace, he is a team fight god, and he's very difficult to deal with. He mega gapped Breathe, and I've definitely soured on Breathe over the past year. I don't think he is like an elite top laner. I don't think he's in that conversation. He's a lot closer to being, someone like Kingen than he is to being like Bin, at least in my opinion, for what he has been, but Bin is really, really great. So really happy to see him perform well. I think Knight had a phenomenal series here. He's going to get almost undersold because he wasn't quite as flashy down the stretch, but the games that really mattered, he stepped up, like the Talia in game 3, the Yone in game 1. Like those were huge moments for Bilibili to be able to kind of push forward in this series. Knight is really back on track, and he definitely gapped Xiaohu here. Elkanon were the better of these 2 bot lanes, even if Light and Hong were solid. Like Light in particular, I think had a really good series. Hong was way too over-eager and over-aggressive down the stretch, but still, like, I'm not going to blame him too much. He was at least attempting to make plays. Elkanon were just better. They're still one of the best bot lanes in the world if they're given the resources to perform as such, but Wei is actually going to get my dud of the series. I'm serious when I say that he tried his best to lose this series for Bilibili Gaming. That is not indicative in his scoreline. 10, 10, and 34 is not like a bad KDA or anything like that, but Go watch this game number 4. Like, it is truly disgusting stuff from Wei on the Pantheon. I've never been the biggest fan of Wei. I've been kind of on the anti-Wei train, or at least I've kept him out of those top 2, top 3 jungler conversations because I just don't think he's in them. I think he is clearly outside of the top 3. Top 3 is way too established for him to be a part of that right now, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be like 100% the right decision to get rid of Shun and to bring Wei back in. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about On not really wanting to play with Wei, and On and Wei not having similar communication styles or similar gameplay styles really in any way, and that's why they went to Shun at Worlds. But if they want like Wei to come in and be what Wei has been for other teams, which is this stabilizing presence, somebody who is going to be more of a facilitator, who's going to slow the pace of the game down, not really take a lot of these skirmishes, then you need to like fully invest into that. If you're going to be a team that plays exactly like Bilibili played last year, plays super aggressive, try to take a lot of these 3v3, 4v4 fights throughout the entirety of the mid game, and you have Wei, then you're just getting worse. Like, Shun is better at that style than Wei is. I think if you want to play around Wei, you have to play his style, and right now they're just not doing that, and that could limit their upside, but it's still Bilibili Gaming. This is still the most talented team in the LPL by a large margin. If they can get their shit together, they're going to be able to dominate. And then for Weibo on the other side, again, I just feel bad for them. I think they played fine. Like, Tian was awesome in this series. He was definitely the better of these 2 junglers, and I think Tian, you know, has really upgraded Weibo Gaming. I shouldn't say upgraded because Tarzan was excellent for them, but he is a fitting replacement for someone of Tarzan's caliber. I think when you look at Light and Hong, they did a lot of nice things. Light just has really consistent mechanics. Game in and game out, you know what you're going to get from him. Xiaohu struggled in the mid lane, but Knight kind of gaps everybody. That's kind of to be expected. Hong died way more than he should have, but at least he was attempting to make plays. Breathe was definitely outclassed on the top side, and I think if I was going to give a dud of the series, it probably would be to Breathe in the top lane because it was a pretty large top gap, especially in that game number 4 with Breathe on the Gnar, and I continue to worry about what Weibo Gaming's upside looks like with Breathe in the top lane because I just don't know if he's ever going to be like that guy. Like, they made the semifinals of Worlds with him, so what do I know? But like, Breathe and Xiaohu just don't really feel like the solo lane duo that's going to get you across the hump, and I think you really feel that when they are in a group with JD Gaming and they have to play a best of 5 against them that they can't win, and they're in a matchup with Bilibili Gaming in the playoffs that they just never are going to be able to win because those players are outmatched. It just feels like they have an inherent ceiling on their playstyle because of some of the downsides of their players, regardless of how well, you know, Tian or Light end up playing. And I think that is a bit disappointing for me, but I think Weibo's going to be just fine. They're going to bounce back in the spring split. This is just a tragic draw for them, and I think in almost any other circumstance, they would be in a pretty solid spot. Like, if they had played either Top Esports or Invictus Gaming on the lower side of this bracket, you know, I think you could consider them theoretical favorites in either of those series. They are that good, and so it is definitely a bit unfortunate, but they are now eliminated from the playoffs. And for Bilibili Gaming, they're moving on. They're taking on Thunder Talk. We're going to cover that later in the video, but that's a rematch from the regular season, a best of 5 that Bilibili lost, and it was their only 3 game losses of the entire regular season. We'll see if they can get their revenge, but there definitely still are some things that this team has to work on. And then moving on to our second of the round 1 lower bracket matchups. Who's going to be joining Weibo as the first team technically eliminated from the playoffs? Well, it's a matchup between the number 2 seed from Group A in Top Esports and the number 2 seed from Group D in Invictus Gaming. And Top Esports is going to pick up the 3-1 series win. This was a very fun series. I know it doesn't necessarily feel fun because it's a 3-1, and Top Esports was definitely better. Like, IG had every opportunity to be able to come out at the start of these games and actually be able to win them, but they just weren't able to do so. Like, they weren't good enough. That being said, these games were still bangers. Like, just because IG kind of got outplayed and it was clear that Top Esports was the better of these 2 teams doesn't mean the games were less fun to watch. I do think both of these teams definitely put on a very enjoyable series, but I'm serious when I say, like, it was very clear that Top Esports was better than Invictus Gaming in this series. You can basically look down the board and just see outplays in every single role. The only role that I don't think you can necessarily say that in is jungle, because Jeje is still playing really well. He was this team's best player in the regular season. That has carried over so far into this first round of the playoffs, into their, I guess, 1 playoff series since they're now eliminated, but Jeje looks good. It's just everybody else that feels really outclassed and feels kind of like less than the sum of their parts right now just because of the way they're playing together. I don't really know what's going wrong on Invictus Gaming, but it is clear that not everything is clicking for this team at the moment. For Top Esports on the other side, this was an awesome performance. We knew they had this in them. I'm still a big believer in Top Esports. I think it had more to do, like, them coming out as a number 2 seed and not as a number 1 seed has significantly more to do with them being in a group with Anyone's Legend, who I think is a top 4 team in the LPL, than it does with me thinking that Top Esports is not a top 4 team in the LPL. I still have them 4th in my power rankings, and I did predict them to win this series, and so I'm not shocked by this outcome, but it is good to see them do it in such dominant fashion. Player of the series for me is going to go to Cream in the mid lane, and I think this is one of the most encouraging things that we could possibly see from a series like this, is Cream actively stepping up and performing so well against Rookie. Cream wasn't perfect in that series against AL. When you look at their one series loss in the regular season, you can see some moments where it's like, maybe he wasn't tested all that much last year. Maybe the mid lane pool was a little bit weaker than it normally is in the LPL, and maybe, he was going to have a crashing back down to earth moment in year 2 on being on a top team, right? Well, here is a matchup against Rookie in the playoffs when it really matters, and he was excellent. The Yone game in game 1, the Akali game in game 4, I get that those are his, comfort picks. He's a melee mid lane player. He is very much in that style of, Zeka or a lot of these other melee mid players. He is definitely that player at heart. He was that for OMG for many years, but who cares, man? It's about the results. If they're going to leave up Yone and Akali in a fearless draft format, then yeah, pick up those champions. His champion pool is already proven to be wide enough that he can supplement that with a lot of the really good mages in the meta. His Hwei game in game 2 was totally fine, was definitely better than Rookie on the Azir, and we know he can play Azir, we know he can play Sylas, we know he can play Orianna, we know he can play Ahri, we know he can play all of these champions. I'm not worried about Cream's champion pool. It's just really nice to see that he is basically the same player that he was for this team last year. Super consistent, not really going to give over any resources, not going to make mistakes, and is just going to help the rest of the team move forward. He has really grown into a much more versatile player than I was anticipating. Big shout out to Jackie Love and Crisp. I thought they played awesome in this series. They were definitely the better of these two bot lanes. Ignore Gala's scoreline, the 21-13-29. Almost all of that is on Kai'Sa in game number 3, and that was a really nice Kai'Sa game in game number 3, but everything else in this series, Top Esports had the better bot lane between these two, and it wasn't particularly close. 369 was solid into the Shy on the top side. The Shy was better, I would say, than his scoreline indicates. If Gala was worse, then the Shy was better than the KDA would indicate, but 369 was still better. And even if Kanavi was excellent, I don't want to disparage Jeje. Kanavi was really, really good in this series. I don't want to say he was the better jungler because that feels disrespectful to Jeje, who single-handedly won them multiple situations, tried to keep them alive in that game 2 with that unbelievable Elder Dragon steal, and then that 1v3 with the Lilia passive. It was, very fun to watch, but that doesn't mean Kanavi was bad on the other side. He played awesome. He still was a fantastic facilitator for Top Esports. Overall, this was just a mega gap. Everybody on the team looked excellent. You can't even really criticize any of the players. They just were really good. Maybe they shouldn't have been in the situations they were in against IG in game 2 or whatever, but so many of those were fixable situations, and they went out and fixed them. They won those games anyways. The only game they lost, game 3, was just a Kai'Sa getting out of control. And so for Top Esports, I feel really good about them coming out of this series. And Invictus, I actually am really starting to get concerned because it's not just a couple of moments now. It's not just a couple of times where this team has underperformed. You are actively looking at a regular track record of Jeje playing pretty well, the Shy not necessarily being perfect, but being okay on the top side, and Rookie and Gala in particular just not being good enough. Rookie's going to get dead of the series for me in this one, but if you wanted to give this to Gala or to Mako, I think that that's entirely fair. The bot lane has no synergy. I know there were a lot of reports, I think it was 2 years ago, that year where Uzi was playing for Edward Gaming with Mako, and things weren't working out. The original report there was that Gala was going to come in and play AD carry for that team, but Mako didn't want to play with Gala, or at least that was the report at the time. Obviously we don't know how true that is. I kind of threw that out of my mind because obviously they're playing together here, but they don't have synergy. Their playstyles are very different. Mako is trying his best to be super aggro, and Gala just isn't really following up in a lot of those situations. He's playing a lot slower than he needs to in these instances, and it's really kind of throwing Invictus for a loop. I think these two need to get on the same page because right now they're not, and quite frankly, Rookie looks kind of washed this year. He was pretty good last year. He was very feast or famine. He has been for the last 2 years, definitely going back to that Top Esports year. I was actually really low on Rookie in 2023 when he was playing for Top Esports. It felt like he was kind of holding that team back, and Cream actually came in and was an upgrade for that team. Rookie was pretty good last year for NIP, was kind of dragging the corpse of that team across the finish line at times, and there were a lot of things to like, and you thought coming back to Invictus, getting into an organization that he wanted to be in, and playing with a former teammate in the Shy that he's won Worlds with. Like, you would have hoped that that would unlock Rookie again, that would be at the very least what he was last year, but he's kind of reverting back to 2023 Rookie, which is a big concern because that's not a top 5 mid laner in the LPL, and they kind of need him to be that. He got outplayed by Cream and by top esports in general in this series, and that is just not good enough. So Invictus has a lot they need to work on. Again, they are out alongside Weibo Gaming in 7th and 8th place, respectively, and that's disappointing. That's definitely not the outcome I think this team was looking for, but there's a lot of time in the year to be able to get stuff together. I'm just much more concerned about them than I am a team like Weibo. I think that there is a lot more to work on, and I think Rookie, Gala, and Mako in particular really need to start getting together. And then for top esports, this is a really nice win. You move on to take on Ninjas and Pyjamas now. That is a very fun matchup that I'm excited to cover later on in the video, but this team is very, very scary. They're just so strong from top to bot. Like, they have no weakness on their team. You could say that maybe Crisp is a player that can throw sometimes, but like, that's such a reach. Like, this is a team with very little avenues to exploit, and if you're going to get, you know, players like Cream stepping up and just being top 2 or top 3 players in their role, then top esports is going to continue to be a team that competes to win the entire LPL. But now we get to move on to lower bracket round number 2. Our final 2 series of the video are going to determine the teams that fight it out to survive and get to the semifinals from the lower bracket. It's the winners from the lower bracket and the losers from the upper bracket facing off against each other. And we have an intergroup matchup, a Group C rematch with the number 1 seed from Group C in ThunderTalk Gaming taking on the number 2 seed from Group C in Bilibili Gaming. And this time it is BLG that ends up coming out on top in a 3-1 series win. You know, I didn't move BLG from number 1 in my power rankings despite their loss to ThunderTalk because I just assumed that they were going to be able to get together, right? Like, my power rankings are not a standings update. I've never used them as a tool to say, like, this team was better than this team last week. It's all about projecting who I think will be better next week or who I think will be better when it matters the most come playoff time. And I still believed Bilibili Gaming were the team to beat and are the team to beat in the LPL, and I think they came out and really proved that here. This is what should have happened the first time these two teams played. You can look at this and see a 3-1, but really at the end of the day, like, game number 1 happened. Beishuan outplayed Wei, and you just kind of have to live with that. Wei has a couple of bad games every once in a while. And then games 2, 3, and 4 happened, and ThunderTalk got absolutely nothing in the rest of the series. I mean, genuinely, it was, oh, game 1, ThunderTalk looks good, and then like absolute massacre, an absolute murder coming in from the side of BLG. I've not seen a more dominant game than game number 2 in quite a long time, but games 3 and 4 were also unbelievably dominant for Bilibili Gaming. It didn't even look like they were trying all that hard or they were tested really in any way after the first game of this series. It felt like they just had a gigantic player gap, and obviously we'll talk about that, but this is the elimination of ThunderTalk from the playoffs. They don't end up winning a playoff series. I can't say I'm surprised. They are my lowest rated team in the playoffs, and I think they are going to crash back down to earth a little bit. I think crashing back down to earth, though, is them going to being like the number 8 or number 9 team in the LPL. I still think they're good, and we'll talk about that. They have pieces on this team. I just think that this was probably the best they were going to be. This was the best shot that they were going to have of getting top 4, and unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be in this series in particular. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is obviously going to go to Knight. I mean, how could you possibly give this to anybody else? Spoiler alert, you can already see it on the screen, but dud of the series is going to Tab. I don't think I've seen a bigger mid gap, like just 1v1 ever. Like, truly, this was one of those matchups where it's just like, oh, like, you're the best player in the world and you're going into a guy who got kicked from a team that was near the bottom of the standings in the LCK last year. Like, yeah, this is the performance we should have seen the first time around. I'm serious. This looked like a challenger player versus like a gold player. It actually was absurd how much Knight was just obliterating Tab. I mean, up 50 CS on Lucian and just moving around the map, solo killing him on command, on repeat. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen a mid lane gap as large as this one was for Knight. It was actually just insane. Knight is a monster. He still is one of, if not the best player in the world. I know people are a little bit lower on Chovy because his team hasn't performed quite as well as they did last year right now, but like, him and Chovy are still 1A, 1B in my eyes in terms of best players in the world, especially mechanically speaking. And when Knight has performances like this, it's just like, why do we ever doubt this guy? Why do we ever even throw any sort of questions on his name? Because he's just so freaking good when he plays well. that Lucian game was unreal in game number 4. And he was awesome on the Rise in game 3. He was awesome on the Galio in game 2. He's just a really good player. Like, Knight is the best player in the LPL, and he asserted that dominance pretty heavily here. Elk was also an absolute menace throughout this entire series. The Kalista game in game 4 was absolutely gorgeous. The Jhin and the Xayah were also really excellent, but like, I still consider Elk to arguably be the best AD carry in the world. I had him as the best ADC in the world all of last year, and he's not necessarily done anything to change my mind or change my opinion on that. He still is the player that got me so excited to call him the best AD carry in the world because of his aggressiveness and his willingness to dominate the 2v2. 1xn was fine on the other side of this, but once again, very similar to what we said about 1xn in the previous series against JD Gaming. When he goes up against the best ADCs in the world, even if he is okay, he's not on their level. Like, he is just not the kind of player that's going to be able to compete with Pays and Elk. It's just not going to happen. And yes, this is a very tough run. JD Gaming, Bilibili Gaming is a tough run, but, you know, Elk came out and showed, like, he deserves to be in that conversation. I think Wei looked excellent after his awful game number 1 on the Nocturne, where he basically just gave Beishwan everything that he could possibly want. There was an invade in game number 4 that went awry at level 1, we'll just say, in favor of Bilibili Gaming, and from that point onwards, like, the game was over. The Sejuani looked excellent. I think the Viego and the Lilia were also fine. Like, Wei in the wins actually finally started to show some of the way that we saw in the regular season last year when he was inserted for BLG. Ben was good. Like, Hoya has actually been really fine for ThunderTalk on the other side, and Ben, you know, did everything he was supposed to. On was really good this game as an aggressive piece. Like, Bilibili Gaming dominated the last 3 games of this series. I cannot stress enough how not close those 3 games were, and hopefully we see more of that Bilibili moving forward. But unfortunately for ThunderTalk, this is the end of the road. They probably played the 2 best teams in the LPL in the playoffs, which is definitely a bit unfortunate, but this team was always going to crash back down to earth at some point, in my opinion. When your mid laner is Satab, like, you're gonna get exposed in the playoffs. I'm sorry, it's just going to happen. He wasn't even really dominating in the regular season. A lot of it was Beishwan and 1xn and even Hoya, Feather, like, those players, like, really stepping up, and Satab was a part of that ride, and he certainly wasn't losing in that same kind of way. But I'm not shocked to see him come out in this series and just get completely, like, obliterated. Like, I'm trying to find a polite word to say, like, he got absolutely stomped in. Like, this was not even remotely close. One of the worst mid performances I've seen in a very long time. Like, you just gotta get better than this. I don't know if, like, this team actually needs a roster change. Like, it's certainly something I would consider if I was ThunderTalk, if only because I think you actually do have a really nice core with this team. Beishwan is in fantastic form right now in the jungle. His Vi game in game 1 was excellent. 1xn is a player that you can be interested in. Him and Feather have good chemistry together. I like Feather as a support. Hoya has really superseded my expectations in the top lane, but I just don't know if this team is ever even going to be remotely competitive if Satab has to go into the other really good mid laners regularly. Like, he had to play Scout and Knight in this playoff run, and he got destroyed. Like, he just was never going to be able to keep up with those players. And if you can't keep up with those players, ThunderTalk is not going to be a team that reaches the highs that people were hyping them up to be after the regular season, after a really good Demacia Cup run. And so, you know, we'll see how that ends up going, but Satab is a problem, is an actual liability for this team. Like I said, there are positives here. Beishwan is in great form. He has honestly started really well in 2025. Beishwan's been a channel darling in the past, so I'm really happy to be able to see that, even if I did start to doubt him at the end of last year. 1xn and Feather, like I said, have very good chemistry. I think Feather's a really good player, and 1xn is a solid AD carry, if not like a little bit overhyped at this point. Like, I'm still going to be a little bit negative on that just because I don't think he's in that upper echelon again. He's going to be a lot closer to what I think of Leave right now than what I think of Elk right now, and I think that that's a fair place to put him. And then, you know, Hoya's been fine. This wasn't even that bad of a series from Hoya, if we're being entirely honest. There have definitely been worse games. So ThunderTalk at least putting up some fight, I think showing why they had success in the regular season, but Bilibili came out to prove a message, and that message was proven in those last 3 games. They are one of the best teams in the world. They are a team you absolutely have to look out for, and honestly, like, who's to say they can't just go undefeated from here on out and just go and win the LPL, represent the league at first stand, and win that first stand tournament. They have that kind of talent. They showed that off here. This is still a team that made the World Finals last year, and I still think they have to be considered one of, if not the team to beat in the LPL. But that's going to bring us to our 6th and final series of the video, and our 2nd of these lower bracket round number 2 series. And this one I was really excited for. I'm really interested in both of these 2 teams and what they were going to look like in a high pressure pivotal playoff series. And it kind of disappointed. It very much was a clear outcome. It was the number 1 seed from Group D in Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on the number 2 seed from Group A in Top Esports. And Top Esports makes pretty quick work of Ninjas in Pyjamas, pretty similar to what we just talked about with Bilibili Gaming and Thunder Talk, where it very much just felt like one team being way better than the other one. In this case, Top Esports just being way better than Ninjas in Pyjamas. Not a super shocking outcome. Again, I had Top Esports higher than Ninjas in Pyjamas in my power rankings, and I kind of expected Top Esports to just be one of those teams that did really well in the domestic playoffs. I think they're built in that kind of way, but I would have hoped that NIP put up a little bit more of a fight. It just didn't really end up happening. I think you could argue this series was even worse for them than their round 1 loss to Anyone's Legend. Top Esports not only has already lost to AL and therefore, are considered to be a little bit worse at the current moment, even if there is like a real argument to be made that if that series happened right now, Top Esports wouldn't struggle as much. It's certainly an interesting conversation to have, but I think that there was some optimism that NIP would be really good in the playoffs because of their propensity to be able to pick a lot of these weird champs in this fearless draft format, but it's just not been the case. I think that a lot of players on Top Esports are very improperly rated by the community just in general, and I'm going to do a little bit of a rant in that section, and we're seeing some of the weaknesses for NIP in terms of their weak links getting exposed, but overall, this was an everything gap. Like, genuinely, you can look at almost any lane and be able to point out that it was just better for Top Esports. So let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series for me is pretty obviously going to go to Kanavi. Just fantastic series overall from Kanavi. He was excellent here across all 3 of their wins, in particular games 2, 3, and 4. I think you can point to almost any of them as the best game, quote-unquote, of this series, but really, this was a jungle canyon, if you want to use that term. It's kind of funny to use that right now, considering Canyon's current form, but Kanavi was unbelievable, and this is the Kanavi I expected for Top Esports. When I talked about Kanavi at the beginning of the year, I said that he was the best jungler in the LPL. I said that he would be, in terms of performance, the best jungler in the LPL this year, and while that hasn't necessarily been the case so far in the very limited action that we've gotten at the start of this year, I still believe he can have that MVP type of season, and we saw what happens when he really gets going in the early game. He still is arguably the best early game jungler in the world. Like, that is the thing he does at his absolute best. It's very Canyon-esque in that regard, but he is able to translate those leads so effortlessly into mid-game pressure, and that's what makes him so dangerous, and that's what makes it so difficult for a player like Aki, who is a lot more reliant on trying to play out not only like early games, but then get to the team fight stage. It's what makes that matchup so bad for someone like Aki, and what makes him struggle so much, and so credit to Kanavi, awesome gameplay from him. I gotta talk about Cream, man, because it really does feel like the community is just, like, not up to speed on Cream. I saw a comment on Reddit that actually had quite a few upvotes that was talking about Cream as, like, people were like, oh, why did Cream have such a low rating on Hoopu? Why were people not, like, hyping him up after this performance? I think some people talked about the missed shockwave in Game 4, but for the most part, he still was really good in this series. Still was a huge positive and has been a huge positive for Top Esports, but I saw a particular comment that really perturbed me and honestly made me laugh so hard that I almost, like, fell out because it had so many upvotes. Like, people in the community tend to actually believe this. I saw some people say that Cream was a Tristana one-trick, okay, who lowered the ceiling of Top Esports, and they just couldn't find a better mid laner, and even though he is playing better this year, they still don't know what the upside is. And if you're the guy who posted that and you're watching this video, I'm so sorry for putting you on blast, but, like, oh my god, like, that's, like, the funniest thing I've ever heard. First of all, if you want to call Cream a one-trick, like, I get it, every streamer calls him a one-trick. Tristana? That's like his 4th or 5th best champion? Like, I don't even understand where that comes from at the start. You want to call him an Akali one trick? Okay, I get it. You want to call him a Yone one trick? Okay, I kind of get that. You like a Silas one trick? Yeah, like, these are the champions he plays a lot of. I get going in that direction. It's kind of been done to death, but, I get it, right? Like, I get why there's a narrative associated with that. A Tristana one trick? That I'm, like, completely lost on. That I feel like you have just completely lost me. He plays Tristana really well. He's good at the champ, and he played it a lot last year, but calling it a one-trick, like, just because he did well in the meta where Tristana was the best mid laner is crazy. Like, I genuinely think is insane. Also, to say Kareem's playing better this year than he did last year. He was first-team All-Pro mid lane for the LPL last year. He was the best mid laner domestically in the LPL in 2024. And, like, I agree with that take. I had the same thing in my videos. I think they actually got that one right. He was better than Knight was domestically. Knight struggled at times in the summer regular season. Where is this coming from? Like, I genuinely just don't understand understand what the narrative around Cream is. And again, like, I wouldn't be too harsh on a comment that was just one throwaway comment, but it had like a bunch of upvotes. Like, who are you people? What games are you watching? Are we on the same planet? Are we looking through the same eyeballs? Like, I don't really know what to say at that point. It was definitely a very strange and a very funny comment that I had to at least touch upon because it genuinely made me laugh in my chair. But alas, Cream is a very good player. He is like a top 2, top 3 mid laner in the LPL, like very quietly right now, because he is very good at playing within the structure of the rest of this team. He can carry games on Akali and on Yone, as we saw in that previous series, but he can also, play Orianna, play Azir, play Ahri, and just kind of be a facilitator. He's a lot more versatile than people give him credit for. That's the reason he's worked for this team, is because he's grown in that area so much. So love Kanavi and Cream, and I think they played really well as a duo here. 369 looked really good in this series. Shanji was not great, I would say, in the 1v1. 369 needs to start stepping up and playing like a top 2 top laner in the world again, because he kind of hasn't been that for a little while, and I think he still can get back there. Jackie Love and Crisp were fine, but this was a middle of the map gap, especially in the jungle. Like, Kanavi was way better than Aki on the other side, and that transitions nicely into Aki being dud of the series for Ninjas in Pyjamas. They might need to look for a new jungler. Like, I don't want to sit here and say that Aki is, like, not good enough for you to be able to win with, because there was the one year in 2023 where he was a top 3 or a top 4 jungler in the LPL on OMG with PP God, and everything looked like it was going to click, and there have been flashes of those moments. Even this split in the regular season, when they beat Invictus Gaming, Aki had a really good series into IG. Like, there are flashes where Aki has shown that he can be a valuable jungler to a good team, but it just all falls apart every so often, and I honestly do think that there is, like, an inherent ceiling to what Aki offers. Everybody talks about the ceiling that Cream offers. Aki has a ceiling in terms of what he can be as a player because he's inconsistent, and honestly because his mechanics just aren't like world class. They're just not like top of the position level mechanics. When he goes up against someone like Kanavi, he doesn't have the ability to skirmish early on in the same way that Kanavi does. He's never going to be able to compete in that area, and I do think that is just inherently going to hold him back, and that's why he's getting dead of the series here. He got mega out jungled. He was never on the same pace as Kanavi, and he lost his team a lot of pressure. It was like a huge problem. Doenby was definitely not nearly as good in the playoffs as he was in the regular season. I think, some of those like creative playstyle decisions that, I'm being generous talking about, things like, pulling out Yasuo in game 4 without really a lot of other knockup potential. Like, you have the Gragas in the top lane, but Yasuo plus Xin Zhao was not like an encouraging mid-jungle duo in my opinion. Like, a lot of those things, they don't work as well in the playoffs when teams have multiple days to specifically prep for you in particular. It's just, the surprise factor isn't nearly there as much. PP God had a really bad playoff run. I think that's going to go under the radar. He was really bad in the playoffs just across both of the series that they ended up playing. He's going to have to be better than that. Leave was, really aggro and honestly was probably the best player on Ninjas in Pyjamas in the playoffs, but even then, he wasn't salvaging these games. Like, Shanji wasn't as good on the top side. There is an inherent ceiling to Ninjas in Pyjamas, and that's why I kept them at number 7 in my power rankings. Like, I hate to feel vindicated about all of my takes in the LPL so far this year, but they've all aged incredibly well. NIP is a team that I just don't see having that high of an upside or that bright of a future. I think they're going to be very scary to deal with, and I think a lot of teams that are unprepared are going to fall into the trap of just not being on the same page to be able to take them down. But the teams that are good, and especially the teams that do their homework, I think NIP is very beatable for them, and I don't know if this is a team that's going to be competing to go to Worlds or anything like that. But Top Esports is. Top Esports is that good. They're in the upper echelon. I think there's a top 4 or 5 in the LPL right now, depending on how good you think Weibo Gaming is after their horrendous luck that they've had so far in 2025. But Top Esports at the bare minimum is a team that's going to be competing to get to the finals. It doesn't get easier from here. Their easy matchups are done. They played the 2 Group D teams, and I think Group D has kind of proven to be one of the weaker ones. They have to go on and face Bilibili Gaming now in an elimination series. That's a tough ask. That's definitely a large conversation to have, but this team is really good, and they have a lot of good things going for them. I'm hoping that they're going to be able to carry this momentum and at least make that series interesting. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL rounds 1 and 2 winter playoffs overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated bracket with the 4 teams that are remaining. From here on out, we're going game by game when we cover these series. There'll be obviously the winners finals coupled with that lower bracket round number 3 series between Bilibili and Top Esports later on in the week, and then we'll have separate videos, individual videos for the semifinals and the finals respectively, and then obviously first stands right around the corner. So a lot going on the channel, a lot to talk about. Let's quickly preview what we can expect out of these 2 matchups that we're going to be covering in the next LPL video, starting with the winners finals, JD Gaming taking on Anyone's Legend. I'm super excited for this matchup because I think this really is the example of like well-balanced team takes on team with higher like individual player upside. JDG is not a well-balanced team. They have plenty of flaws. They have a couple of things they really need to fix. Players like missing have really not connected as much in 2025 so far. I think Shun is definitely still prone to running it down a bit, but their best players are the best players in this series. I think in my opinion, Paze and Scout have just been so ridiculous so far in 2025 that it's hard to bet against them in a best of 5 series where they might be the 2 best players on the Rift. But AL is certainly a much more well-balanced team. You have basically great players across the board, or players that are playing like elite players across the board. The only concern for me would be, can Hope survive against Paze? That's definitely going to be something that I'm looking at, but I think Shanks is good enough to be able to survive with Scout so long as you're getting the good version of Shanks, and I think jungle is an advantage for anyone's Legend, and so I'm really excited to see what ends up happening in this series. Honestly, right now, I'm slightly leaning in favor of JD Gaming because, again, I just really trust in Paze and Scout, and I really do think they are that good, and I just would feel bad like betting against them. It feels like wrong for me to say that they won't win because I really do believe in them individually as players so much, but I don't think this is some sort of blowout by any means. I did go 6 for 6 in the first 2 rounds here. I predicted every single game or every single series in this video correctly. Hopefully I can keep that going here with a JDG prediction on the upper side. And then for Bilibili Gaming taking on Top Esports, this one's a little bit easier for me. Bilibili are favorites until proven otherwise. Like, I get that they lost to Thunder Talk, but things were going wrong in that series. As long as Wei plays like a human being, I think Bilibili are more than good enough to take down Top Esports, as we saw multiple times last year domestically. I don't think enough has changed for either of these 2 teams for me to think that that series is going to go any differently. Again, the only thing I could see being a problem for Bilibili is if Wei is not clicking, doesn't have a particularly good series, and Kanavi comes out and plays excellently for Top Esports, which is a possibility. I think if jungle ends up being a huge problem for BLG, that's certainly something we acknowledge later on, but at least until, proven otherwise, Bilibili are going to be favorites in that series. I would guess that's going to be 3-1, and I would guess JDG 3-2 over AL, but I'm picking JDG and Bilibili Gaming to move on. BLG versus AL would be a totally separate conversation. We'll preview all that stuff when it actually happens later on, but that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, like I said, we'll be covering the rest of the LPL as well as the first stand tournament right around the corner, but we're also covering all 3 of the other major regions and all of their playoff runs. So the LTA, the LEC, the LCK, which did finish up earlier today. I posted my finals analysis of that. Check that out on the channel if you're interested, and hit subscribe and hit that bell if you want to be notified when the rest of those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all